So welcome everybody to our Endurance Nutrition Clinic. I'm Varun Sriram with UCAN, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Sports Dietitian Bob Seebohar from Energy Performance. Bob has multiple decades of experience in the sports nutrition industry. Not to date you, Bob, but it's really more of a sign of your intellect because you've got a whole lot of knowledge to drop on us today. And you've really seen the evolution of sports nutrition and endurance. So really, really excited to have you. And thanks so much for being part of this.
Oh, thank you, Varn. I appreciate it. Evolution is a word I think we're going to come back to here in the few minutes here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we'll dive right into our topic here in just a moment, but I want to give you a chance to tell folks a little bit about yourself. I provided a little bit of your background. You're a sports dietitian, but you're also somebody who doesn't just talk the talk, but you walk the talk, you run the talk, you swim and bike the talk. You do it all. And before we got on here, Bob, you were sharing with me something pretty crazy that you're about to do. Yeah. So let's just start off by telling a little bit about yourself and letting them know what you actually are.
Yeah, I won't get too long-winded, but just to kind of set it up. So I grew up a competitive team sport athlete. So I grew up a soccer player, played a little bit of basketball growing up too. And I didn't hit endurance until I was in my undergrad college, and that was off of a dare. And really have never looked back, from triathlon and running and ultra running and obstacle course racing. I mean, you name it. I think I've almost done it in the endurance world, similar to nutrition. But yeah, it seems like, every year I do something different. I try to do something different. I'm in Colorado, so I try to get on my trails, or not my trails, the trails quite a bit, and just out and about. And this year I was presented an opportunity literally just a little while ago, and wasn't planning on it, wasn't on my race calendar or anything. But yeah, I'm back into marathon training. Let's just put it that way.
And marathon training where? Somewhere normal like Boston or London?
You would think that I would be smart enough at this point in my life that, yeah, let's like stay stateside. Let's do a great epic race like New York, Chicago, Boston, whatever. No, kind of been there, done that, Varn. So I'm going to take a trip up north, and it's going to be a little chilly. And it is actually not even a technical land marathon. It's not trail. It's not land. It's not actually on land. I will be doing the North Pole Marathon in 8 weeks, in mid-April.
That's unbelievable. Before you told me that, I had no idea that there were marathons in the North Pole. So you're literally going to the North Pole.
There's only one. There's only one. And it's on a floating sheet of ice that's 6 to 10 feet thick on top of the Arctic Ocean.
So, as we go on with this conversation, Bob might say some things that are going to blow your mind. You might think to yourself like, hey, is this really possible? But I mean, he's literally running a marathon in the North Pole. So anything is possible. But Bob, that's going to be amazing. And we're excited to hear about that. But how about your background in sports nutrition? How long have you been doing this? What's been your experience in sports nutrition, and what has driven your passion for what you do?
Yeah, I think you're really trying to date me, aren't you, Varn? I mean, honestly, I've been doing this for a very long time. I have 3 college degrees. And the only reason I say that is just to say that I actually started in exercise science and exercise physiology, and did that for a few years in my career, and then went back into nutrition, became a registered dietitian. And when I did that, Varn, like, I knew full on when I went back, I'm like, it is sport nutrition or nothing. Unfortunately, at that time, and this is how long I've been doing this, at that time, there were no sport nutrition jobs in universities or professional teams. I mean, no one really knew what sports nutrition was back then. But as a new endurance athlete, I knew that I was having severe issues fueling myself, because I moved into triathlon and long course and Ironman. I didn't get it. Like, I was learning all this stuff, but I just wasn't putting 2 and 2 together. So I just jumped into it. And it's been my passion, trying to find solutions to all these interesting challenges that endurance athletes have with nutrition, because it's not like one thing or the other. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do this and everything's going to be better, right? It's always this complex jigsaw puzzle. And that's what keeps me really, just motivated and just psyched to continue doing what I'm doing in the sport nutrition field. Because, as you said, this has been an evolution. Like, I have seen so many things come and go, and now they're coming again. It's amazing just to see this. So it's been, again, not to date myself, but 25 plus years now.
And you've worked with some amazing athletes in some amazing places. Were, you know, head of sports performance at the University of Florida when they were winning a whole bunch of championships. You know, in the 2000s, you worked as the team triathlon dietitian for the U.S. Olympic team. For just the host of Olympic level athletes, professional athletes, but also everyday athletes like Linda Quirk, who's going to be joining you in North Pole, right? Who's a grandma, and she's running amazing marathons all across the world, across deserts. So we're really excited, Bob, to have you here and have you join us again. For those of you that are familiar with UCAN, you may have heard from Bob over the years, and he's been an amazing resource to us because he's worked with so many different types of athletes: endurance, power, all age groups, all paces. So yeah, just really, really thrilled to have you on here today.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So let's set the scene a little bit for what we're going to talk about, and then we'll get it going. You know, we always like to start out with a little bit of theory because, Bob, you have seen so much. So we like to kind of educate folks in the audience. You know, what are they hearing out there in terms of what you need to fuel for endurance, and which of those things should we buy and which of those things should we sell? You know, so we're going to talk kind of a little bit about some of the general principles behind fueling for endurance, how Bob has kind of seen those things, I'm going to say the word again, evolve over the years, and even how his thinking has evolved a little bit on that over the years. And then we're going to dive straight into UCAN. And I know a lot of people are here to get specific recommendations, and there's been a lot of questions we've had from endurance athletes about different aspects of UCAN. So we're going to kind of take you through the different products and the different timing and strategic ways you might want to think about fueling with UCAN. How does that sound to you, Bob?
Perfect. I love it.
Well, let's do this because we're going to get to the UCAN section of our discussion in a little bit, but just right off the top, tell us, how did you hear about UCAN and what were your thoughts when you first learned about it?
I love this story because it was literally in 2005. Literally 2000. I mean, we're talking a long time ago, right? I remember I got a call from one of the co-founders, Peter Kaufman, called me up. I was actually at University of Florida. He was trying to track me down. And, you know, he was basically saying, hey, we've got this product. And, you know, as a sport dietitian, I get these calls all the time, emails all the time. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, you know, step in line, right? I'll take a number. But what he said initially was like blood sugar stabilization. And I think, as you know, and maybe everybody on the webinar knows, that my big thing is really, how do we improve metabolic efficiency, which is basically optimization of blood sugar through food, through macronutrients. And he mentioned blood sugar control. And I think that's what hooked me, Varn. That's what made me not hang up on him. I don't do that. Let's just say that. But really, that's what piqued my interest. I'm like, that's interesting. Blood sugar. Okay, now you've got a product, a sport nutrition product, possibly. It wasn't even a sport nutrition product back then. And he was basically kind of fishing like, hey, do you think this could have some efficacy in the sport nutrition world? And I said, listen, if you can back up that it, you know, kind of support that it actually stabilizes blood sugar, I'm game to talk again. But you have to have some research to show me. And usually, Varn, when I say that to companies, they're like, oh, okay. And I never hear from them again. So time went on. I moved from Florida, came back to Colorado, worked at the U.S. Olympic Committee, and he found me again. He's like, hey, I just want to let you know, we've got a little bit of research. I want to send you the research study. And it was a small study, kind of a pilot study. But what I saw in that was shocking, that, you know, and that was just the powder, the super starch before, you know, anything came about. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, these are really interesting research findings, very positive. And it piqued my interest. So that, you know, I kind of came on board with UCAN supporting them because I'm like, hey, listen, I'm seeing this in research. I got to try it in my training, although, you know, you guys didn't have all these great products back then. It was literally just plain super starch back then, right? And I was mixing it, I was running, I was taking a blood sugar, a blood glucose meter with me. I would stop, poke my finger, the whole thing, and seeing tremendous results. I'm like, well, this is weird, because it was always taught, and it kind of still is, that it's all about simple sugars. It's all about carbs, especially for endurance athletes. Although I do work with a lot of collegiate athletes, high school athletes, that message is still there regarding the simple sugars, which kind of bothers me a little bit, but we don't have to get into that. But it's interesting because that's where we started. When I say we, meaning endurance athletes and even sport dietitians, sport nutrition professionals. And now we have a product that is going against the grain. And that's what I loved about it, because I love asking the question, why? And that's really what sparked my interest in this. And that's why, however many years later, I've been like one of the biggest UCAN supporters ever for many different reasons, from a health perspective, performance perspective. It's amazing for all different ages and athletic types, and even sports for that matter.
That's a tremendous teaser about what we're going to get into diving deeper with UCAN, but you set the scene really, really well in terms of some of the foundational principles of UCAN that I want to pick your brain on more. And really this idea of blood sugar stabilization. So, I kind of provocatively have been talking about this idea of like why everything we know in sports nutrition is wrong. And certainly everything we know isn't wrong, but there's a lot of things over the years that you probably got schooled in that now you've said like, hey, why was I doing it that way? Just give us some insight into that, like especially when it comes narrowing down on this idea of like energy for endurance athletes and what endurance athletes need to do to get energy.
Yeah, the good news is these very old guidelines have been starting to change a little bit, but these guidelines, we have to remember, come from the government, right? And everything in the government moves extremely slow most of the time. So let's keep that in mind. But yeah, where we really started, especially with endurance athletes, was the food guide pyramid, right? So eat a bunch of carbs, a little bit of protein. Oh, don't eat too much fat because, that's not going to be good for you. So that unfortunately is still, being taught in school, but that is where we started. And the whole premise was do that in your daily nutrition. And then when you're training, eat a copious amount of simple sugars, the more the better, because, and nobody ever told us this, because, if you eat more carbs in your daily nutrition, you have to eat more simple carbs in your training nutrition too, because you have to keep up with the burn, if you will, right? The gas tank goes up and down very quickly with the carbohydrates. So unfortunately, that message is what sparked me to really create the metabolic efficiency training concept, because myself, along with a ton of endurance athletes I was working with at that time, and this was late 90s, early 2000s, we were getting GI distress, right? And like I did my research, I got the books out again and everything, and I came to find that the daily nutrition with such a high carbohydrate and low fat, kind of low to moderate protein, was really predisposing athletes to some really bad gut issues. So that's kind of where that started my interest in looking at these energy swings, blood sugar swings. Then come to find out, only from going back to my research and back to metabolism classes in grad school and you name it, that, if we actually balance some things out in our nutrition plan with food, we can actually affect that gut response and it can be a little better. So where we're at now is actually looking at our daily nutrition to support blood sugar control by periodizing or mixing and matching, increasing, decreasing carbohydrate, protein, and fat, right amounts, right times, right everything. And that leads us to a better, I guess, I hate to say this, but maybe a better burn rate. So you're not burning through all the stores of carbohydrates so quickly. It's much balanced. It's much more balanced, and you have stable energy throughout the day, which also lends to not needing a lot of simple sugars during training, during competitions. That's where if we were to be talking about this about 3 to 5 years ago, that's where we were, right? Now there's this, and it's kind of upsetting, this influx of research on training the gut to consume and tolerate a ridiculous amount of simple sugars. So we're back. This is the evolution, right? Back in the days when I started, it was like, eat a whole bunch of carbs in your daily nutrition, eat a whole bunch of carbs in training nutrition. Then it calmed down a little bit, right? Metabolic efficiency, fat adaptation, UCAN came out, totally upended the sport nutrition field in the world. And now we're kind of coming back, evolving back into those I think it's very volatile messaging that we started with 25 years ago.
Kind of like for the everyday person, because that's most of the people who are here on this webinar today are, age group athletes, like
right.
Everybody probably wants to go as fast as they can and perform as well as they can, but also people want to do the sport for, years and years ahead, and they're using an avenue to stay healthy and fit. So like that idea of training yourself to consume as much simple sugar, training your gut, like even in theory, if it was possible for some people, why is it detrimental? Or in your opinion, is it detrimental? I should ask you.
It absolutely is. And I remember vividly to this point when I was at the US Olympic Committee, I worked with triathlon quite a bit, and those guys and girls were very young. If you look at the past Olympic teams, they were really young, and some of them are out of the sport now. But I remember sitting down with one of the males, and I won't say his name, and we were chatting about this very thing about, oh, I'm taking whatever 8 to 10 gels during workouts. And I'm like, okay, like why? We kind of figured this out a little bit. And he said, well, don't, and then I kind of got into the whole, do you think that's really beneficial for you? He's like, well, it's what I need during training. And I said, well, how do you know that's what you need? Like, did someone tell you? He's like, no, it's just because, he's doing it and I want to be where he is. Like, I want to be on that gold medal, whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's where the messaging is coming from. Interesting. So then we started talking about this. I said, well, do you think taking 8 to 10 gels for longer workouts, do you think that has an impact on your health? He's like, well, no, I'm young. It's fine. My body's burning it and I don't do it that often. So then I was like, okay, tell me what your training plan is. And I basically figured this out, Varn, as he told me. I'm like, oh, so you have 4 days a week that you're actually doing this. Because Olympic level triathletes, I mean, let's just say they train a lot, like a lot, right? So now I find out he's doing this 8 to 10 gels 3 to 4 times a week. And I'm like, oh, so you're putting all this simple sugar in. And so here's the thing. I don't care if you're in your 20s and you think you're bulletproof in your 30s. I mean, just like you said, Varn, we are all aging. We want to do this. I don't care what caliber you're at. I work with Olympians, same message. Like, we want to prolong careers, right? Even as age groupers, recreational, we want to be doing this in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We want to have our kids, our grandkids, whatever, right? The thing we need to think about is too much simple sugar consumption in your daily nutrition plan can predispose and preemptively cause or increase risk stratification for certain disease states. And that's the issue I have. I don't care if you take like simple sugar, a sport drink, like a simple sugar sport drink or gel during a workout. I don't really care. But if you do that over and over and over, and your daily nutrition has a lot of simple sugars, listen, people, like, I'm in the business of improving health and performance, not just performance. And I firmly believe, and I've never strayed away from my metabolic efficiency messaging, you do not need as many simple sugars as you think you need, if you need any at all. And that's been my message literally for the past 20 years.
So you've alluded to this a little bit, but this idea, and we get these questions a lot, and we'll talk about this when we dive into the UCAN portion of this in terms of the specific fueling recommendations. But people have this idea of 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, or even for longer exercise, like to maximize performance, 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Then they start kind of doing the math on how much they're using UCAN, and oftentimes it's different for different athletes, but they'll fall in quite a bit lower. And then the natural question is like, do I need more? Am I taking enough? And a lot of the times, this question doesn't even stem from an experience where they followed the UCAN protocol and where it's like, oh, I needed more. It's almost like preemptively, like when they're planning out how to use UCAN, it's like, wait, but I saw that I need 30 to 90. So can you just comment on a little bit of that research and how kind of the, every age group athlete should view that?
Yeah, so let's put this in context. So when I was going through school and starting my sport dietitian career, literally the research was supporting 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate consumption per hour of training, right? So let's just say it didn't really change, and I'm not going to be exact on this, but it didn't really change until about 10 years ago or so. And that's when it bumped up to about 90 grams, right? In fact, there is more. There's actually some evidence and some research to support, I don't even want to say support, to identify maybe a larger ceiling of 144 grams an hour, Varn. So that's just crazy talk right there, right? But I wanted to set that up because like the first half of my career is 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. Then it kind of migrated into 30 to 90, pushing that 90 up a little bit more. What we need to consider, and this is what really bothers me, I love research, I definitely appreciate it. We need to understand who it was done and how it was done, right? So the subjects, and this is why I work with males, I work with females. There is no way a male and a female endurance athlete has the same nutrient timing plan. I don't care who you talk to, I don't care what research you look at. We don't have the data on female athletes. Now it's being done, which is great, but it's going to be a while till we have conclusive evidence, right? So number one, females, you got to take yourself out of this equation. All those studies were done on male athletes, number one. Number two, we need to consider, and this is what a lot of research doesn't consider, we need to consider what they're eating during the day. Because here's the thing, if someone, because there's all these diets out there. Like when I was going through school, it was really about high carb, low fat, and the Atkins diet. That's all we really had for the most part, right? Now we've got keto, carnivore, LCHF, still high carb. I mean, we got them all, right? So we need to understand what you're doing in your daily nutrition, because that can actually predispose you to needing more or less carbohydrate during your training, right? And that's my metabolic efficiency training concept. So what we've seen is an evolution, but we've got some really, in my opinion, some really debatable research in terms of carbohydrate consumption per hour, because every single one of us is not the same. And Varn, you remember, let me give you a quick example. You remember when I was doing my little experiment with the CGM, continuous glucose monitor, I was trying out a whole bunch of different products, simple sugar, and then UCAN. And again, N of one, right? I was cycling, I was running short, long. What I found, because I tried to overfeed, I actually tried to get to the 90, even 100 grams an hour. And Varn, I just need to tell you, it was a struggle, because I just felt like, and this was during a run, I was always consuming. Like I couldn't get in my run rhythm. I couldn't get in my breathing rhythm because I was always consuming something, right? Who wants to do that? I mean, that's the thing. I remember a lot of the athletes, endurance athletes I've worked with kind of liberating them from not following the 30 to 90. And maybe it's 30, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 20, right? There's no magic number, but I remember them telling me, especially Ironman athletes, are like, you just made my life so much easier because I don't have to carry a lot of stuff. I don't have to put a lot of stuff in special needs, and I'm more efficient, which means I can eat far fewer calories or grams of carbohydrate per hour and sustain the normal intensity, if not higher. And if I may, really quick, Varn, that's a huge, huge fallacy out there, is that you cannot teach your body to burn fat at higher intensities. You can. That worked out well, isn't it? Right? You can do it, right? Because, and when you do that, you don't need 30 to 90 grams. That's what gets me. I'm totally on the other end of the spectrum, right? I have found in my research, anecdotal testing, everything over the past 20, 25 years, I believe if someone really dials in their daily nutrition, right? Not eating a lot of simple sugars, they're eating protein, they're eating fat, they're eating carbs, not restricting, not low carb, high fat, nothing crazy, that you only need about 10 to 40 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Now, are there going to be anomalies? Absolutely. I've run into these athletes. I'm like, wow, I don't know how you do it, but you do it, and all your health parameters, because I check blood work a lot, all your health parameters check. These are the guys and girls who have a really good deck of carbs to work with, meaning their genetics are fantastic, right? So it's not to say everyone shouldn't do this. I mean, there are some people, some athletes who can, but I really question the health consequences of continually doing this. And if I may, sorry, I'm going off here, possible GI distress. So we know if you consume a lot of simple sugar during workouts and your body's not used to it, i.e. you are trying to teach your gut to eat more, to consume and to tolerate more carbs, that can actually trigger GI distress. So now we're talking about bloating and vomiting and gas and diarrhea. I mean, who wants that? Right? So that's what I really have a problem with, these higher carbohydrate intakes per hour, mostly because, and again, there is some research to suggest, if you eat more and you can actually tolerate it during training, you can actually absorb more. But I question why? Like, why do you need to do that? Why do I need to carry 10 gels with me for a 2-hour workout? Like, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, yeah, right. Instead of training your gut to take more, why wouldn't you try to train your body through a smart nutrition plan to take less, right? So that's a great perspective. Even just helping people quantify that idea of like, hey, let's try 10 to 40 as a starting point instead of 30 to 90. And then you can always adjust up. You don't need to start at that high. You can start at the lower and adjust up. Great stuff, Bob. A lot of fantastic theory, like really, really insightful kind of answer, I think, to a question that we get time and time again. So I appreciate that discussion. Let's kind of bridge from what you were talking about there and go a little bit into UCAN and how it works. And we'll come back to the blood sugar idea, because there's a couple more things I want to I want to ask you about that. But
Okay.
I'm going to take just a minute to share my screen and just give some folks here who
Yeah.
might not be entirely familiar with what exactly we're talking about when we talk about UCAN, but provide just a little bit of background. So, Bob, you can see what's on my screen
Yep.
here.
I
Perfect.
can. Correct.
So in terms of UCAN and what makes it unique, it all comes down to the carbohydrate in UCAN, and it's a unique ingredient that we call Live Steady. You might have heard Bob off the top refer to it as super starch, and for those of you that have been longtime users of UCAN, you know that's what this carbohydrate, this unique ingredient, was originally called. Now it's called Live Steady. More of a idea around what it does, which helps keep your energy and blood sugar really steady, but it's the exact same ingredient. So Live Steady, it's a starch-based carbohydrate. It's derived from a non-GMO cornstarch, and it's low glycemic. It's a complex carbohydrate, and it delivers a steady release of energy with no spike or crash. What's really unique about the Live Steady and the whole origin story, which is what fascinated me about the company, when I joined UCAN 10 plus years ago, and Bob, I'm sure this fascinated you as well, when you kind of heard the story behind it. So it was originally developed as a medical food for kids with life-threatening low blood sugar. Our founder's son, one of our co-founders' sons, Jonah, you see on the screen, he had a very rare condition where he had to be fed every 2 hours to maintain stable blood sugar, stable energy levels. So for years, throughout his early childhood, his family was waking up, setting multiple alarm clocks, feeding him every 90 minutes throughout the night in order to sustain his energy and sustain his blood sugar. It was extremely stressful and challenging situation. And they spearheaded a lot of research into nutritional solutions for this condition, which ultimately led them to discover a patented cooking process that when you apply it to starch, causes the starch to break down a lot more slowly and steadily. So it's delivering this very steady, long-lasting stream of energy. And for kids like Jonah, they were able to take 90 grams of the starch prior to sleeping at night, and it was keeping their blood sugar steady for 8 to 10 hours. So it was really a totally life-saving discovery for these kids. This is what Bob alluded to earlier. We had some of this research around 2009, and one of our co-founders, Peter, had called Bob up, basically trying to get his opinion and the opinion of other top sports dietitians and people who work with athletes on does this type of carbohydrate, this steady release energy instead of this quick sugar-based energy. As you guys have heard, the whole sort of industry and education has been centered around this quick sugar-based energy. So we had something that was totally opposite, and we wanted to understand if that had any application for sports. So ultimately, we did a clinical trial in 2009 on trained cyclists. We've since done multiple other clinical trials that have shown that the Live Steady allows athletes to maintain stable blood sugar during and after exercise. Equivalent servings of our starch are Live Steady compared to maltodextrin, which is kind of like a fast-acting carb used in a lot of newer sports nutrition products. The Live Steady was shown to maintain blood sugar for 2 to 3 times as long. And also because the carbohydrate comes in so steadily, it doesn't cause a rise in the hormone insulin. There's also a better fat burning environment, a better fat burning potential when your blood sugar is stable and the whole system is stable. So Live Steady is really what makes UCAN unique, and it's the patented ingredient in UCAN. It's completely unique to our product. Bob, we had a couple people ask this question. I think it's a good time to hit on it. So we've talked about simple sugars, which Live Steady is not. But what are examples of simple, when you say simple sugars and people kind of flip around their sports nutrition product and leave the label, what are
Yeah. I mean, glucose and dextrose are the primary simple sugar, if you will. I mean, we lump other things in there like fructose, even maltodextrin, even though it's not a simple sugar, it's still a sugar, right? But the simplest of sugars is literally glucose. And, look at the products you guys are using and girls are using, if you are. I mean, this is what's funny to me, Varn. I'm like, if I were to develop a sport nutrition product, I would not use glucose or fructose. And here's the reason why. One, it's overused, right? It's in literally almost every single product. And if they don't want to use it, they start using maltodextrin, which is just a little bit more branched. There's a little bit higher chain of carbohydrates on there. So it's a little more complex, but they're all sugars, right? They're all they fall into that sugar response of, like you were saying, it increases blood sugar, it increases the insulin response. But that's what's funny to me is like none of these companies are doing anything new. obviously, except for, UCAN, and which is great. And that's, I guess, from a simple sugar standpoint, that's what you're really looking at, is that glucose or dextrose as a true simple sugar.
Now, just because something isn't a simple sugar doesn't necessarily mean that it stabilizes blood sugar, right? So when we talk about the uniqueness of UCAN and Live Steady, it's not simply that Live Steady isn't a simple sugar, but it's actually that Live Steady breaks down very slowly, as you see in this graph, and it's giving it's represented by the green line, and it's giving you that consistent and stable energy over time, which is really by virtue of stabilizing your blood sugar. So there's things that aren't simple sugars that are commonly found in sports nutrition products that are also giving you this quick spike in energy, right? That also kind of fit to what you're talking about. Things like, I think of maltodextrin or honey, for example. Can you just kind of speak to like things that aren't simple sugars, but still don't fit into this principle of controlling blood sugar?
Yeah, it's interesting because sport nutrition products have evolved. Also, there's been an evolution. So back in the days, we had just basically the glucose syrups, right? And that was our traditional gel when we talked about gels. And then I think it was Power Bar did some research, and they found that if you added fructose, you could actually try to absorb more sugars across the small intestine. So then all of a sudden that led to the whole 90 to plus grams of carbohydrate per hour. Then they're like, oh, we'll just flood our system with glucose and fructose. And then athletes were like, listen, we don't want to eat a lot of sugar, because they were now realizing that glucose and fructose are simple sugars. And then a lot of companies moved to maltodextrin, because number one, maltodextrin itself doesn't, it kind of sounds intimidating because it sounds sciencey, right? But it still causes that rush in that initial spike in blood sugar. So even though there are more molecules of carbohydrate and carbon on there, it still creates that fast spike of blood sugar and hence insulin. So, the whole sugar is a sugar, I guess. Yeah, it really is. Whether it's glucose, fructose, maltodextrin, doesn't matter. And that's why we kind of lump these all into the simple sugars, because of the physiological response in the body. So structurally, a maltodextrin is not a simple sugar, but the physiological response, it is, right? That's how it responds in the body. For, like, you can see from the graph, that little gray area is your maltodextrin, I would imagine.
And when you talk about physiological response, we're really talking about blood sugar response, right? And so
blood sugar, exactly.
Coming back to this idea of blood sugar control, fundamentally, like, what are like even outside, we correlate Live Steady with blood sugar control, but because that's what it does. But even putting Live Steady and UCAN aside, like, why should people want to control their blood sugar? And specifically, why should endurance athletes want to control?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, and I alluded to it before, like my whole concept of the metabolic efficiency training, it literally is built on how do we control and optimize blood sugar. So thank you for asking that. There are so many health, I don't even want to say performance, but health benefits first. So if you can control your blood sugar, you can control your fasting blood sugar, you can control your fasting insulin, you can control so many other things. There's actually almost every disease state has a blood sugar component to it, because there's an inflammatory response to, there's, like, you name it, from certain cancers to obviously obesity to diabetes, pre-diabetes, right? Dementia, all of these things have a blood sugar component. And that's what's fascinating, because if you look at the rim or the hub of a wheel, in all these spokes, I feel like the spokes are all these disease states, and most of them drive back to lack of blood sugar control. And so from a health standpoint, it's a huge risk factor for some health and disease, right? From a performance standpoint, think of it this way. If you as an endurance athlete, when I moved from triathlete to ultra, or Ironman triathlete to ultra running, it was kind of a wake-up call for me, because, like, when you're Ironman training, you're like, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to swim at this time, I'm going to work, I'm going to maybe do a track workout. But when you're an ultra athlete, like ultra runner specifically, you need to be able to run anytime during the day, because you're going to be running at 1 a.m., at 6 p.m., like, it doesn't matter. So I actually had to teach my body to have steadier energy throughout the day, so I didn't peak and valley. So I could wake up and say, oh yeah, I'm not running until 11:30 tonight, or whatever it was, right? I needed to make sure as an endurance athlete that my energy was steady throughout the day instead of these mountains and valleys. because I feel like a lot of endurance athletes, we try to ride the wave, right? We eat something and we're like, all right, start your watch. Hour later, I'm going to hit the pool because that's when I'm going to have that intense energy surge, and then I'm going to crash. Oh, but that's okay, because I'll have whatever my recovery is, which is a lot of the simple sugars, and then I'll bounce back. The whole key with performance in steady or in blood sugar control is making sure you don't have a lot of energy dips throughout the day. You want to be ready. But here's the thing also, Varn, that I do need to bring up. Again, we're all aging. We all work. We all, whatever we do, it's important that our brains are functioning top level, top notch. If your blood sugar goes up and down throughout the day, that means your cognitive functioning also follows that curve. So think about, you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, la, la, you're in la la land. You can't pay attention. It's the 1 to 4 p.m. crash. All that is, I mean, aside from if you do have a disease state, all that is you're not regulating your blood sugar. And it's so easy to do. That's what gets me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so easy to do. Stop the roller coaster, right? No crashes. You're not going to need naps throughout the day. Even if you're training 2 or 3 times a day, you're not going to need naps, right? And I'm not talking about being overloaded on caffeine too. You don't even need caffeine if you don't want it. It's all about supporting blood sugar. So energy it's not going to be flatline. There's still going to be some rolling hills in there, but it's not going to be spiky.
And Bob, I think this may be clear to some folks that have heard you before, but like how much blood sugar control is tied into your entire philosophy of nutrition. Like it really is the perfect match from what the UCAN product does. And honestly, we wouldn't be doing this together if the UCAN, like you wouldn't be talking about UCAN, right? So it's like for us and for this discussion, like UCAN makes so much sense to what you're preaching because we both have the same foundational idea of how to balance your energy, sustain, performance. So yeah, like everything that you're saying about UCAN can be equated, or about blood sugar can be correlated to UCAN, but at the same time, like you believe that independently of UCAN. It has not. It's just
Totally.
a good notion that UCAN, the product happens to work, philosophically in terms of what you believe in.
Well, and that it's 100%, right? I mean, that's what drew me to having those conversations early on with Peter, right? Was that, I saw the research, I tested it myself. We had more research coming in. I don't want to say I was a believer, and I was, but I'm not saying that was the only thing, like, oh, la, la, la. It was such an integral part of my philosophy, because that's what my philosophy is. Like, through food, how do we optimize blood sugar, control health, performance? And then you need to find products that support that. And literally before UCAN came on, there were no products. There's still, honestly, let's call it what it is. There's still no products that do what UCAN does. I'm sorry, people. Everyone asks me, oh, what else can I use? Nothing. There's nothing out there, right? So that is the thing. But here's the thing too. It's not like Peter was like, hey, Bob, if you jump on board, I'm going to pay you $1 million so you can support UCAN. I'm like, no, like this falls in my philosophy. That's exactly what you're saying, Varn, is just that, like, this is part of my philosophy. This is part of every day. Every athlete I work with, Varn, I don't care if they're a 14-year-old swimmer, a 7-year-old ultra runner, I don't care. It is all about controlling and optimizing blood sugar for health and performance. And UCAN is always part of my strategy, always.
And, like you've talked about, there aren't, there's perhaps more than when we started this 10 years ago, but there aren't tons of leading nutrition voices for endurance athletes kind of screaming that off the mountaintop. So I think I always like to start these sessions. We're going to dive in, take the next, 10 to 15 minutes here to dive specifically into the different UCAN products and exactly how to use them in training. But I always like to start these off and spend a good amount of time kind of talking about blood sugar control, talking about philosophically what you believe in, and then marrying how UCAN fits in, because I don't think so much of what you just said in the past half an hour is not what people are hearing when they're Googling, what do I need to eat for marathon training, right? So I think it's a vital part of the discussion in order to be able to wrap your mind around how UCAN's going to you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And let me just say, Varn, so athletes, you go to a sport dietitian, and please choose a registered dietitian who has, a little bit of alphabet soup after their name. They need to be a registered dietitian. But bonus points if you can find someone that has this CSSD after their name. That's just a board certified specialist in sport dietetics. But here's the thing, that's great, but not many. And I mentor so many young sport dietitians, Varn. Let's just put it that way too. Put that out there. But what's still being taught, and it is frustrating, not by all, but a lot of sport dietitians, is the whole, okay, you're an endurance athlete, like flow chart. You're an endurance athlete, follow this route, eat more carbs, eat more carbs, eat more carbs. And I'm not saying, I'm not carbophobic. Like, carbs are important. The right type of carbs is what's important. It's just not carbs in one bucket, right? But unfortunately, yeah, a lot of my colleagues are still, and even the young ones coming up, because that's what they're learning. That's what they're being taught, right? And, you know, thankfully, I'm educating, UCAN is educating, that there are different ways to achieve success in sport, in aging, in cognitive functioning. And those are the messages we're trying to deliver. But yeah, to your point, unfortunately, there's still a lot of the old messaging being sent out.
Well, hey, you know what? We're getting hundreds of athletes to join us on a Thursday afternoon to hear about
That's right.
philosophy. That's how we start opening minds to new ways to do
Totally.
this.
Totally.
So Bob, let's we have a few questions that we will not run through some of the questions here at the very end. Let's take the next 10 minutes just to give people kind of a specific talk through the different products and how to think about using them in training. I know a lot of people are on here for that. So let me share my screen again right here. And can you see me up here?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
So let's start with the pre-exercise fueling. And you know, because of the way UCAN works, this is actually one of the best opportunities you have to use UCAN. You know, set yourself up for the workout with a very steady stream of energy. But in terms of the products that we have for pre-workout fueling, most common products that people are typically using for endurance sports are the energy powder or the Edge energy gels. So with the energy powder, you've got 20 grams of carbohydrate with the Live Steady per serving. The energy gels are 15 grams of Live Steady per serving. There's no sugar or fast carbs in any of the products. So all of the carbohydrate you see is coming from this starch-based Live Steady carbohydrate that we've been talking about that's designed to stabilize your blood sugar. A serving can last between 60 and 90 minutes. Again, this is going to be individual. It's going to depend on some of your sort of daily nutrition patterns, whether you need more or less. We've seen people get more. We've seen people who need to take more. So this is kind of a benchmark. You know, typically we'll think about the gel as about an hour of steady energy, 60 to 75 minutes. And then the powder, because it's got a little bit more carbs, you know, up to that 90 minutes of steady energy. All these products are extremely easy on the stomach. One of the things we didn't talk about with Live Steady is because it's a very, very complex carbohydrate, a very large molecule, it gets out of your stomach very quickly. You don't need a certain amount of fluid to aid digestion. So it's very, very light on your stomach. And then finally, you can also preload with multiple servings for extended energy. We have a lot of Ironman athletes, marathon runners, you know, some of the top runners in the country, from Sarah Hall to Emily Sisson, who just set the marathon record, loading up with 2 or 3 servings of the UCAN energy powder prior to their marathon, and then not having to do much fueling until later in the race. So Bob, let's just kind of talk about the pre-workout opportunity with UCAN. You know, what have you seen in terms of like you don't necessarily need to regurgitate the sort of specific that you've made, but more of your insights on like what you see with athletes using this.
Yeah, I think it's great that UCAN has so many products to choose from now, because again, back in the days, it was just the plain powder. So like, oh, okay, how do I do that? And then, you know, we were mixing our own gels before the Edge came out. So, you know, with just the powder and water. So it's very diverse now. I would say it is sport dependent and person dependent, but certainly I think, like you have up on the screen, I think Edge has been a game changer in my practice personally with athletes that I work with, because it's easier, it's on the go, you don't need water. I do still feel like the energy powder is a game changer also. It's very diverse. You can put it in stuff. You can put it in morning smoothies, which I do have a lot of athletes do. Honestly, I think what you're saying, I wanted to touch on something, whether it's the energy powder, and let me qualify energy powder 0 protein. I think that's pretty important for endurance athletes. You don't need a lot of protein before the workout, right? So let's, because I know we've got two different products. So this is the energy powder, no protein, and the Edge gel. I do want to comment on that preloading, because I've been experimenting lately also, Varn, and I do agree with that. You know, when we talk about loading, like loading has always been synonymous with carbohydrate loading, and that's not what we're talking about here, right? We're trying to get more of the Live Steady starch in our body, and it's actually okay on the stomach, because one thing we didn't mention yet is you can actually empties the stomach extremely fast, but it absorbs across the small intestine very slowly. That's that slow burning energy. That's why you can load it, because it empties so quickly and it doesn't give you any GI distress. So like I've been with my marathon training now, I'm using, the Edge, there it is. And I'm still tweaking this a little bit, but if I'm going to go out for a run, I usually have my rule of, if it's 5 miles or less, I do 1 edge. If it's 5 to 10 miles, I do 2 edge. If it's over 10, I do 3 edges. So I did a 14 miler last weekend and I did 3 edges 30 minutes before. Amazing. Right. And I mean, literally in this, it's just like, it just makes everything so much easier. Now, I do want to also mention the snack bars. I just want to mention that just because I do find that some of my ultra runners, ultra cyclists will actually want to chew something before their runs or their bikes and their longer stuff. So that's where the snack bar comes in. So I would actually add that to that pre-workout fueling also. I think it's very, very easy. One, the bars taste great. And two, they're not too difficult to chew, right? It goes down pretty easy. So I would add that to the lineup for sure.
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of people do that as, long run or long brick workout morning breakfast. Started off
Right.
with the snack bar also has a
Yeah.
list. We'll talk about that here in a moment. So Bob, as you were talking about the bar, I think like what's really unique when we're talking about blood sugar stabilization with the powder and the Edge is you're getting stable blood sugar without having to pair carbohydrate with protein or fat, right? Because in a lot of times
Exactly.
you want to kind of create that balanced blood sugar response, you have to pair different foods. And
Right.
that really allows athletes to have this sort of long lasting bout of energy without feeling very weighed down in the stomach, because sometimes it's tough right before a workout to find that perfect mix of foods. But, there are, perhaps some athletes that might want to start with something other than UCAN, and then, have the UCAN more as a during fuel. We've had a few questions around that. So what's an example of like a good breakfast, a non-UCAN breakfast that would help balance blood sugar and support what we've been talking about?
Yeah, that's actually a good point to hit on, because like let's take a runner. Traditional runner breakfast is like bagel and peanut butter, toast and peanut butter, banana, whatever, because we think of it as safer food for the gut. Like we always need to think when an athlete says, what should I eat before work? And I'm like, whoa, it's not necessarily about what, it's about what effect it is going to have on your GI system. So a lot of times I try to segment that and ask the athlete, do you have or have you had GI distress in the past? You're going to be in this bucket. If you've not had GI distress in the past, then I get to answer your question, Varn. Okay, if you're pretty safe downstairs, all right, maybe it's some yogurt and granola, maybe, because we do want a little bit of protein, not a ton, or a banana and peanut butter, or maybe it is a smoothie, right? That's a fruit-based smoothie with just a little bit of milk, just a little bit of protein, not a lot. Like you don't want to be doing like eggs and bacon until like something so heavy and so low in carbohydrate. You still need some carbs. But I did want to mention that because about 80% of the athletes I work with, Varn, I think you need to remember, one, even though if they don't have GI distress during training, we need to remember what you're doing before training with your nutrition is going to preemptively dictate your race day nutrition plan. So if you always have a bagel of peanut butter before training sessions, your body gets used to that. But here's the big but. You step on the line, or like before the line, marathon, cycling event, like whatever, triathlon, then all of a sudden, these hormones in your body get stimulated. And that's why we always have to pee and do the other thing so much before a race, is because these hormones, we're getting nervous. That's that stress response. I see most athletes not able to digest their normal breakfast anymore, because now we have that stress response before a race that we do not have before training. So that's a big thing. And that's why, I mean, personally, I try to always have UCAN before workouts whenever possible, because I know it's safe on my gut. And I know when I race, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing, because I don't want anything downstairs that's going to cause any issues for any reason, right? So I only say that because, again, there are some athletes out there that they have iron guts. We love to hate these athletes because they can just consume anything, and power to them, right? If you can do that, that's great. but you have to remember the stress response of race morning will upset and will somewhat, I don't want to say block, but will change your digestive response of the food, especially if it's solid, if it's not a liquid base. And again, I'm plugging UCAN because, I mean, I got to tell you, Varn, like, I don't even have to do race morning nutrition plans anymore, because it's like, listen, let's just forget solid food for the most part, right? And it's just so much easier. Like, literally, it's like, call it what it is. Like, you don't have to think about it. Have 1 to 3 edges, have a shaker bottle, 2 to 3 scoops of energy powder, call it good. Like, get on your morning and don't worry about stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And very helpful, Bob. Appreciate providing the example. And there was a couple of people that asked the same question of like, could you wake up really early, eat, like a balanced breakfast a few hours before, and then have UCAN closer to the start of the race? Absolutely. Right. We have a lot of people who, for whatever reason, feel like they want to get some substantial food in them, do it that way, where they're not eating the breakfast too close to the start of the race.
Let me just comment on that, because it's 100% true, right? That's like Ironman philosophy, right? You wake up, start at 7 a.m. You wake up between 2 and 3. You have a great breakfast. You go back to sleep, although we're not sleeping, right? We just go back and lay in bed and thinking about what's happening. You wake up 5 o'clock. Maybe you grab all your stuff, go to transition area, grab an edge with you, like energy powder, whatever. Here's what we need to remember, because I'm usually on board with that, but here's what we need to remember. When you put food in your body, it especially if it's carbohydrate based that has fiber, it will produce residue in your gut. Residue sometimes produces gas. Now, I'm a triathlete. I haven't raced for a couple of years, but if I'm going to put on a wetsuit, that's not what I want, right? I don't want it anytime, but you have to remember, if you do that balanced breakfast, that could cause residue in your gut, that could cause gas, flatulence, uncomfortable feelings, bloating. I just want to make that apparent, because it happens, especially with athletes who get very stressed on race morning and who may have GI distress concerns already. So I would not recommend that strategy for those type of athletes.
Really good perspective. And I think, a lot of this stems from sometimes, like, again, people just might feel like, hey, I need breakfast before this. I need to be eating. I'm going to be out there a certain amount of time. But like
totally.
I remember one of the first conversations we had years ago, you kind of told me like, hey, your body has enough stored fat for you to do like 8 Ironmans in a row or something like that.
Easily.
Like, obviously you have to train yourself and have your diet in a way where you can get by on that. But for people, doing, 4 or 5 hours of exercise, it's not like they need to be loading themselves up with food before the event to get through it, right?
Yeah, I just think because there's so much stuff floating around the internet, and I think that's what's kind of putting people almost in this stressful and this high anxiety phase, that they always feel like they need to eat something, right? And carbohydrate based. Oh, I need a banana. I need this. I need a bagel. I need toast. Like, you actually don't. Like, to your point, Varn, like, you've got stores of fat. You got stores of carbohydrate. I mean, you can usually last between 2 to 3 hours of a moderate intensity training session and run on the gas tank of carbohydrate stores that you have in your body, right? So, I get it, but here's the problem with the morning, right? After an overnight fast, your gas tank, your carbohydrate gas tank is going to go down a little bit. Here's the other thing. If you're eating a high carb daily nutrition plan, your gas tank goes lower throughout the night, because you eat more carbs, you burn more carbs, right? So now you're sleeping and you're losing more carbohydrates. So when you wake up that morning, you're like, oh man, my tank is a quarter full instead of a half full, maybe, right? And that's just basic biochemistry. I say that because these are usually the athletes who feel like they need to eat a lot on those mornings, because their gas tank is low because they haven't nailed their daily nutrition. So now they're going to reach to UCAN. They're like, oh, that's not going to work because it's not enough for me. Well, that's because your body needs more, because you trained it to need more. That's the whole 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour or whatever. What you've done in your daily nutrition has supported the fact that you need to eat a lot more on race morning. And that's not what we want to do. I'm just so sorry to say that. I mean, it's not the time to consume too much. Like, you want to be more efficient on race morning with your nutrition, so you don't have to disrupt the gut as much.
No question about it. And that's, we hear from coaches, from dietitians, from athletes, that's the number one thing that can screw up a race, is disrupting your gut. And, of course, so much of that gut disruption happens during exercise. So let's talk a little bit about the during exercise fueling. And
Oh yeah.
I do want to just acknowledge for everybody on here, I know we're nearing an hour. I really appreciate you still holding strong, very, very little drop off. So folks are compelled by what you have to say, but out of, respect for everyone's time and your time too, Bob, we'll try to go just about another 10 minutes here before we wrap up and just get through this, answer a few questions. So
yeah,
I think a lot of what you were just talking about with the GI issues pre-workout, I mean, they really set us up for this during fueling discussion, and kind of identifying like GI distress and putting in too much into your system, putting too much sugar into your system, either pre-workout or during the workout, is one of the top things that can derail your race performance, right? So with during workout, you do see the bars here, but very similar mix of products that we talked about the gels, the powders, and the bars can all be used during a workout. Again, kind of the same nuances we hit on the last page, a little bit more carbohydrate in the powder, a little bit less carbohydrate in the gel. I would suggest starting with 1 serving per hour during exercise, and then you can adjust up or down and see what works for you. Again, if like Bob talked about, if you're loading with multiple servings pre-exercise, if you're having 2 or 3 servings, like Bob was alluding to with 3 gels, you probably don't need to start fueling an hour into exercise. So think about what you do pre. That's going to kind of set you up for when you need to start fueling during. So this isn't perfect math, but if you take 2 gels pre, then maybe you only need to start fueling at 90 minutes or 2 hours into your run. Whereas if you take 1 gel pre, maybe you need to start fueling, an hour into your run. So that's the general adjustment. But if you sort of, in your mind say 1 serving of UCAN is going to last me an hour, and you start there and you play around with it in your training, it'll be very easy for you to adjust up or down. For ultra runners, and then I'll turn it over to you, Bob. My last comment is for ultra runners, for Ironman triathletes, or even for people that might be more on the 5-6 hour side in running a marathon. The bars also work great during training. They're going to have a little bit of protein and fat to help with satiety if you're out there for a really long time and your stomach starts grumbling. And then they also have the live steady carbohydrate, which is going to give you that stable blood sugar, that steady release energy. And then the only final thing I want to say, and we've heard this from so many folks since we've launched the Edge, is, most sugar gels require a certain amount of fluid to aid digestion. So you need to time your gel with your doses of water, and sometimes like people mistime it, or they taking in all that fluid with the gel can leave them feeling a little bloated. You have the water sloshing around in the belly. That's one of the biggest conveniences folks have found with UCAN Edge, is that it's a gel that they can take in with no additional fluid. And that's huge. So yeah, Bob, I'll turn it over to you. What would you like to note about fueling during UCAN?
Totally agree. Let me just hit on the Edge really quick. People, a lot of the things, I'm sure you've heard it too, Varn, is, wow, these packets are so big. Well, if you shake it, I mean, you can literally hear it. I don't know if you can hear it or not, right? But you can hear it. And that literally, like, I love that is not a pudding, syrupy. It is such more watery. And again, that I don't know if that's why it's a little bit bigger packaging, but you know what, you get around that. Like, I've never taken water when I've taken Edges. Like, I don't need water with it. Like, literally, no, I don't think anybody has, right? But that said, I did want to hit on our ultra peeps, right? For our like 100-mile plus, because in ultra running, we're getting into the 200, the 240s, ultra cycling. We got stage race events. I do want to bring in that these are all fantastic. I also like using the energy plus protein powder for those guys and girls, Varn, because they're going to be out there for multi-days, so it could be 1 to 6 days, right? So I also like factoring, because we do need a low protein, and you alluded it with the snack bars, but I find that that's more satiating. And remember, a lot of these ultra stage races, we do go a little bit slower, so our body can actually digest a little bit more protein. That's why you see a lot of these athletes eating solid food. And hey, if that works for you, power to you. It doesn't always work for me, but I love bringing in the energy plus protein, because it just gives you, one, a little bit more calories, keeps you satiated. Like you're saying, your stomach isn't grumbling every couple hours. And I actually increase the dosing, knowing that they're going to be out there for 2 to 6 days. So I'll probably, this is generally speaking, I'll start with like 2 to 3 scoops of energy, powder or energy plus protein powder. And I'll usually do 2 edges an hour just to kind of start with, because if you think about it, over 2 to 6 days, like you're going to be in a huge energy deficit unless you're that athlete that can, pull over whatever, eat a cheese pizza and call it good. Like, again, if that's you, power to you, right? But I usually find that dosing needs to increase for ultra athletes.
Yep, that's a really good distinction, because we do have folks that are kind of all over the map here.
Right.
Taking it to like a 3 or 4 hour marathoner, I mean, do you generally recommend starting with 1 an hour for
Yeah, I
like
think
that?
I think that's safe. You go like 3 to 5 hours. I think start with 1 an hour, totally safe. But here's the thing, like try it in training first, right? See how your body's reacting. But here's the other thing, throughout training, you should be making your body more metabolically efficient anyway. So yeah, stick with 1 an hour, see where the body sits like after the first 3 weeks. If you're feeling like you need more energy, or I wouldn't say less, right? I mean, possibly, maybe you push it out every 75 minutes. But yeah, stick with 1 an hour. I think it's safe. And then you just titrate up or down based on that.
Now, there's, we talked a lot about sugar and kind of not making sugar the foundation of your nutrition plan because of the impact on blood sugar. We certainly have had some questions about, like, what if I want, either like that mental pop or more of that boost feeling later in the game, or what if I use UCAN and also take a sugar gel? Is that going to screw everything up? So could you comment on maybe like strategically if there was a right time to use sugar, when it
Yeah, for sure.
UCAN, and how they kind of go with that?
Yeah, because we're not, I mean, I want to make it apparent, like I'm not sugar shaming, right? I mean, could there be a time and a place for simple sugars during training? Yeah, absolutely, right? I base it on level of competitiveness, though. So if you're like a higher level recreational athlete, like very competitive in your age group, or professional athletes, usually this is what I call their engine runs a little bit hotter than us normal people, right? So they're burning through a lot more. Even though they're efficient, we know even from research that elite athletes actually use nutrients differently than the non-elite athletes. So definitely, if you are one of those athletes with the competitiveness a little bit higher, you can offset that. If we're just talking, let's just say a gel, right? Let's talk about the edge versus a normal simple sugar gel. You can offset those and do like 1 every other. I've done that with some highly competitive athletes, where 1 hour it's the edge and the other hour it's the simple sugar-based gel. As long as there's no GI issues or concerns, you can certainly do that throughout an event. I probably wouldn't do that like for an ultra, because you're kind of that water is going to boil over at some point, because you're just out there for days and days. And again, a lot of simple sugars will usually start to creep up the GI distress monster after a few days, for sure, of ultra stuff. But back to it, if you're super high competitive, professional level, or really, really vying for that podium in your age group, like most races, you can certainly offset like an every other feeding during training with a simple sugar versus a UCAN product.
Absolutely. And I think some of the things that we're looking at developing down the road, hopefully sometime this year, is a UCAN edge gel with caffeine, because for a lot of athletes, that's giving you that stable release of carbohydrate. And sometimes people want that pop or that boost, but they don't necessarily need it from sugar. They're more looking for that mental clarity and that mental pop later in the race. But that's good commentary on how to use it with sugar. And then the other thing I just want to address, we have a lot of people kind of asking about specific other brands and how does this compare to UCAN. And what I just generally say is no matter what the brand is, virtually every energy gel product on the market, and certainly all the big names that people are asking about, are based on this idea of simple sugar or maltodextrin. So turn around the label on the gel that you're used to using, and you'll see one of the first ingredients will be dextrose, sucrose, or maltodextrin. And that's sort of what we've been talking about here as our discussion, where those are designed to give you that very quick spike in energy. You're not going to get that sustained blood sugar. You're also more prone for GI distress. So yeah, this is really almost the opposite of how those products work in terms of most of your competitive products. Let's move on, Bob, to post-workout, and then we'll start to wrap this up. So I kind of put in post-workout recovery / daily nutrition, because some of the things you say here kind of might hit on both of them. But so energy plus protein is the optimal product for recovery. It's got 15 grams of Live Steady and 20 grams of protein per serving. It comes with whey protein and pea protein, so there's different options if you're vegan or non-vegan. Essentially, the benefits of this product, it's steady release carbohydrates, so it's got the live steady to sustain your energy, plus added protein for muscle recovery and repair and satiety. And then the energy bars, they're a really effective way to curb that post-workout hangry feeling, that low blood sugar feeling we sometimes get where you want to eat everything in sight. So Bob, I'll ask you, certainly whatever you want to comment on these products, but a specific thing I want to ask you is like the energy plus protein. Why would it be advantageous for an endurance athlete to use that product versus, just 20 grams of whey protein with no carbs, or, any commercially available carb protein drink with, like even 20 grams of sugar, 20 grams of protein? Like, or why is this advantageous?
Yeah, I think when we talk about post-workout recovery, nutrition, eating, whatever we want to call it, we're looking at, we need to fill up the carbohydrate gas tank. Although I am going to talk 1 second about that here in 1 minute. We need to fill up the carbohydrate gas tank, but we need that protein to help the muscle repair also, right? And that's part of it is that combination, and tons of research has always supported carb plus protein post-workout. So you don't really want one or the other, to be honest, because both of them work in concert with one another. In fact, you can actually reduce the amount of carbs that you eat post-workout if you add protein in there. So that tells you it's like a great relationship, is they're working together, right? That said, what I did want to touch on was, I think we need to keep in mind, what are our goals after a workout, right? But first, we need to remember that during any type of workout, your body afterwards, it's broken down. We know this, it's dehydrated a little bit, but our body actually is in a fat burning state. And I really hate to say fat burning. If you know me, you know I don't like that word. I just don't want to say oxidation. Anyway, our body is primed to burn fat after a workout. The reason I say this is your post-workout nutrition will be dictated on your next workout timing. So let me set this up. If I get in the pool at 6 a.m. today, and my next workout is at 12 o'clock, lunchtime, and it's a track workout, I only have about 5 hours, 4 hours, depending on how long you swim, to kind of get some carbohydrates back in my system. Like, that's a rush, right? And it's a quality workout 5 hours later. That's when you need to rush carbohydrate consumption and a little bit of protein. However, if I have my 6 a.m. swim, but then I'm not working out until tomorrow morning, maybe it's a run, maybe it's a group run at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., whatever. Now you have 24 hours to fill up the tank, right? This is what I always teach athletes, and I always ask them, because they ask, oh, what should I eat afterwards? And I always ask them, when is your next training session and what is the objective of it? If you have between 16 to 24 hours in between training sessions, you do not need to stuff your face with all these carbohydrates. This is where UCAN energy plus protein powder come in really handy, or the snack bars, right? You don't need to stuff your face with all these simple sugars and all this stuff. Now, again, it's context, right? If you have another workout that's very important in 5 hours, yeah, what I would actually do is I would use maybe like one, if we're going to put it in UCAN speak, I would put 1 scoop of energy plus protein, and then like 2 scoops of just energy powder, right? Because we need more carbs to help recover. But the point is, I believe a lot of endurance athletes these days, and this is because of media, a lot of them are doing it wrong, because back in my days, the message was just eat as many carbohydrates as possible after training and you'll be fine. We don't need that. There are 2 different ways of doing this. And if you're trying to manipulate your body composition, body weight, and if you're trying to, really stabilize your blood sugar, don't dump a whole bunch of simple sugars in your body right after a workout. I mean, you just don't need it unless you're turning it around very quickly. Even if you're a triathlete and you're doing a run off, like you're doing a combo workout or a brick workout, bike and run. No, like this is where UCAN comes in really important, because you want stable energy. You don't want to be bounced around all the time. But I think that was a long-winded answer, Varna. Hopefully I got my point across.
No doubt. No, it's very, very helpful. And I guess a lot of that, what you were talking about with stable energy and not wanting to bounce all over the place, like it correlates to even the day-to-day fueling for endurance athletes, right? Like we're certainly not saying, make UCAN what you're having with every single meal, but there are different, like people get really hungry during marathon training. And if you're working, if you're busy,
Totally.
or in any type of endurance training, it's not always easy to have a perfectly balanced meal at every point in the day. So like the UCAN bars, the UCAN Energy Plus Protein, they're also really good bridges
Yeah.
just for your daily energy, especially when you're in training and kind of like experiencing that always hungry type of feeling.
Yeah. Well, and my big thing is finding protein in foods, right? So if you're at work or whatever, you're like, oh man, I can't get out. There's no protein. At least you can, in the very basic form of the energy powder, just that carbohydrate powder alone will stabilize your blood sugar. Like that's again, it's a no-brainer for me. It's like, wow, if I'm going to choose a banana or a scoop of energy powder, UCAN energy powder, I'm choosing the energy powder because the banana will spike it, but the energy powder, the Live Steady, it won't. So that, again, in my mind, is like no brainer. Like you got to have this stuff available, put in your drawer, put in your backpack, like whatever, put the snack bars wherever you can, because those are your go-to when food is not working or you're not able to get the food or you're dropping the kids off at soccer practice or whatever it is. Like that's the thing.
No question. Bob, we did an amazing job of it. I'm just looking through these questions, and I guess when you go a little bit long, the good news is we get to answer a lot of the questions. Now, there is one thing that kind of I'm seeing 5 or 6 different people ask, so we'll close on this one because I think we hit on anything else. So when we've talked a lot about fueling, and of course this whole discussion today was centered around energy and carbohydrate intake, and that was purposefully done this way. As you guys heard, I mean, we could have a whole session on daily nutrition. We could certainly have another session on hydration because there's been a lot of questions about hydration. So just to hit on hydration, one of the things that Bob mentioned, and we were talking about not needing water with the UCAN gels. We were more talking about that in the context of you don't need water to aid digestion. We weren't suggesting UCAN somehow replaces your hydration. It's just that you don't need to combine the two together, right? So you can hydrate as needed independently of UCAN. And a lot of you guys are asking about electrolytes, and we have the a few different UCAN electrolyte products. We have the UCAN Hydrate, which is actually formulated by Bob. It's a 0 calorie, no sugar electrolyte replacement, 300 milligrams of sodium, 150 milligrams of potassium, 50 milligrams of magnesium. So this is going to have 120 milligrams, of potassium. So this is going to have a lot of what you want from an electrolyte standpoint. And the great thing about this, again, is it doesn't have all the sugar. So people find a really nice combination of utilizing, the energy powder and the Edge gels as their carbohydrate source during their exercise. And then you can supplement with the UCAN Hydrate. It comes in stick packs like you see here. And it also comes in a little jar that you could scoop it with. And a lot of people, the energy powder and the Edge gels, they have some electrolytes, but not a very large amount, 50 to 100 milligrams of sodium per serving. Pretty on par with other gels you would see. So like, just like you wouldn't use a competitive gel as your electrolyte source, I wouldn't say use UCAN Edge as your electrolyte source. If you're training the heat, if you need additional electrolytes, the Hydrate is a great way to supplement. And Bob, any general framework for how people should think about hydration, how much they need kind of with a product like UCAN Hydrate?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because hydration, it always opens that Pandora's box because we are so individual. And me in Colorado wintertime, you in the Northeast wintertime, like everyone's in a different environment. So that actually dictates how and when we should hydrate also. But if you're here's what I recommend usually throughout the day: drink water. Water's fantastic, right? But remember, you're going to get water from fruits and vegetables also. So if you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, but here's the other thing, like if you have a problem drinking water, a lot of my athletes I work with, especially the younger guys and girls, they don't want to drink water. It's boring, right? And that's, again, where the Hydrate comes into play. So I usually recommend, to try to get your hydration to where it needs to be. So you're urinating about every 2 to 3 hours. That's my rule of thumb. If you're not going to drink plain water, I actually like using the tub of Hydrate because I can titrate how many scoops I put in. So use that throughout the day. I mean, that's when we formulated that. That's why we didn't want sugar in it. That's why we didn't put anything crazy in there, because we wanted it to be very complementary to your water intake and kind of jazz up your water so you stay hydrated, you keep hydrated. So Hydrate's fantastic during the day, in addition to during workouts and training.
Very last one for you, Bob, and then we're gonna call it. So we talked about the electrolytes, and there was another question, where there's other gels or products that might have amino acids or antioxidants or certain things. Like, carbohydrates are certainly important, and the right types of carbs during endurance activity. Electrolytes, like you just talked about, are important. What is the role of something like amino acids or antioxidants?
Yep.
That's something people need to focus on or worry about for endurance.
I would say yes and no. So let's break down. Amino acids are they're byproducts of protein. So during the protein digestion, protein gets digested and denatured into different amino acids, right? So what I always tell people is there is a time and a place to consume protein during workouts and races, especially for our ultra guys and girls, but usually not in the whole protein source. That's where the amino acids come in. So they're already denatured. They're much easier on the stomach. We talk about branch chain amino acids. So leucine, isoleucine, and valine are the more popular ones that we need. But I usually say, you don't always need them, but listen, you wake up, oh, dark 30. Yeah, I mean, maybe taking some amino acids if you can't eat anything or if you can't consume anything, like that's going to help start the body's repair process. And I know that sounds weird before a workout, but we do kind of want to be cognizant of that. But there is definitely a time or place for amino acids for sure. Absolutely. But again, unless you're an ultra athlete, I wouldn't do whole protein sources. Like don't eat a piece of chicken while you're running. Do the amino acids, branch chains, amino acids when you're running. In terms of, I think you mentioned antioxidants. I don't think you really need antioxidants during training, right? If that's what we're talking about. Now, throughout the day, obviously the promotion of eating whole foods to get antioxidants, that's the messaging that we really want to send. So that's an easy one to answer.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Bob, you've answered them all because I see a lot of thank yous in here. So I think
good.
A lot of people got their questions answered. I just want to thank you guys because these are only as fun and engaging as the audience, and you guys were super engaged. I think we had over 40 questions fired into us. Like I mentioned, we still have over 100 people that are still tuned in here an hour and 20 minutes later. So I just want to thank everybody so much for joining us today, Bob. We've done these numerous times, and yet there's still something I pick up every time talking to you. So I just want to thank you so much. There's been a lot of questions. People were really, really interested in the opening part of this when we were talking about some of the nutrition theory, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to learn from you through various resources you have. So give us a little plug. If people like what they heard from you, what's the best way for them to follow you and get schooled on all things nutrition, not just UCAN, but a whole bunch of other nutrition related?
Yeah, depending on how you work, right? You can find me like if you go to Instagram, my company Energy Performance, ENRG Performance, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm not on Twitter too much. You can go to my website, energyperformance.com. I'm out there. Like I've got so many webinars. You just Google my name. You can pick up a copy of my book, right? Metabolic Efficiency Training, second edition. That's a great knowledge base. So you can get that from my websites. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty transparent online. I mean, you can find a lot of great free content. Obviously, if you want to work with me, you can, shoot me an email, give me a call. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and Bob, you got the Inside Sports Nutrition podcast too, which you host with your colleague Dina, which is an amazing.
Yes.
If you guys want to learn about certain foundational topics around nutrition and nutrition for all types of athletes, like Bob's got an amazing library of episodes that you could go back and get schooled on, many of the topics that people had questions about. So I definitely want to plug that. I think it's a terrific resource, and it's really cool to have folks like yourself and Dina who have so much experience in the industry putting out this valuable information. So people do have a good place to find credible information. So perfect. Yeah, check out Bob's website. I did post it in the chat, energyperformance.com, and then also the Inside Sports Nutrition podcast.
Perfect.
But with that, Bob, I'll let you go. You're a busy guy. You probably didn't park this much time with us, but I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
I always love hanging out with you, Varn. This is always fun.
Awesome. Well, let's do it again. You are, if anybody wants to hear about Bob's adventure to the North Pole, I have a feeling we will be talking about that a few months from now, and some fueling for ultra endurance events as part of that as well. So stay tuned. There'll be more to come from us, Bob. But thanks again, everybody. I just wanted to, one last housekeeping thing. Everyone will get a recording of this session. Some people I know jumped on late. A lot of information that you want to review. So by tomorrow morning, you will get a recording of the session emailed to you, along with a special offer to try UCAN.
Nice.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Bob. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.